Great to be here today, and thank you very much for coming to attend this session. I think I've got a little bit of feedback from both these mics at the moment, so I'm going to step away a bit. So this is the CloudStorm track. So just to make sure you're in the right place here, this is where we're going to talk about all the issues, all the challenges that prevent the corporate adoption, corporate enterprise scale adoption of cloud technologies. In the two other rooms, we have sessions with the proofs of concepts in our cloud ceiling track, and in the far room we have sessions with the cloud providers and our partners in our cloud foundation or formation track. So this is about CloudStorm. Well, let's see if the technology is working. There we go. So on this track, I'm going to lead it off with a keynote speech, just to outline the topics in this area and our challenges. And then we're going to talk about 4 separate topics, the top 4 topics that we feel are impediments to enterprise cloud adoption. Security issues, transparency issues, management issues, and regulation issues. So we have a great set of people, great set of panels on each of those 4 topics in this room through the rest of the day. So let's get started on this particular session. So first thing I want to do is just recap the vision we have here for cloud computing. An extra couple of words in this one just to emphasize the legal and the regulatory aspect. So we want to drive this new level of IT agility. And this comes for us from fulfilling unified customer requirements. We're bringing together a set of requirements across this industry from the expertise from our various different corporations, bringing it together through the Open Data Center Alliance. Secure federation of cloud services. Security, obviously number one, critical thing for us. Federation is also a critical word for us. Multiple cloud providers and also enterprise IT as an internal cloud provider, federating services for our businesses across these different areas. Common management and policy. We need to be able to establish a consistent management framework across this entire environment so we can apply policies, whether those policies are security, operational policies, disaster recovery policies, replication policies. Each of these things are critical to us. Service assurance. This is a key aspect of Open Data Center Alliance, and it's part of the language that we use in terms of creating services and defining the things that matter to us and the language we use for these things. Transparency. Transparency is about how we measure services, how we assign those services, how we select those services, how we measure those services, and all the aspects of transparency across them. That comes driven through our capability, the metrics from this as well. And then finally, continual compliance to all applicable laws and regulations. Obviously representing a financial services customer, I would say that for sure for our industry, but I think this is consistent for every industry. Everybody needs to be able to comply with the laws. They need to be able to assert that they comply with those laws, regardless of where the service provider is situated and where the service is coming from. So we're proud to be a member of the board of the Open Data Center Alliance. I have to say, having served on a number of external committees and alliances in my career, this one feels a bit special because of the breadth and the depth of the companies involved and the richness of the conversation. There's something special going on in the board, in the coordination committees, and in the working groups of this Open Data Center Alliance. So there's something different happening here than you see in many other organizations. So we're focused on tangible solutions. And from the start, back at the start of 2010, and creating our first set of usage models, and trying to understand how we can speak with a single voice representing customers here, through to the first delivery of those usage models in June 2011, bring it through that cycle, then through into a cycle of delivery with our cloud providers and our partners in this space. Now we're starting to deliver proofs of concept, and the proofs of concept you'll see in the cloud ceiling track. Colleagues from BMW and National Australia Bank partnered with great solution providers such as Terramark and Trapezoid on the security side. We have some really interesting proofs of concept in this space. So what we're talking about is starting to become real. Requirements delivering through to solutions, informing the industry and bringing this forwards. So our goal for 2012, continue doing this. Expand the amount of solutions we're delivering, grow our adopter base, bring value to all of our customers and all of our affiliate companies inside this group. Next slide, please. So this is a slight drill down on the alliance and industry lifecycle and how we see this working. To start with, just one forward, please. So we start with the opportunities and the challenges emerging. And as these emerge, we're trying to figure out what do these things mean. As we start to look at those challenges, we start to encapsulate these things into requirements. And for us, requirements drive the ODCA usage models. So usage models for us is a way of describing the actual requirement and making that requirement into something tangible that we would like to see achieved in this area. So next one, please. So driving from the usage models, the solution providers then address those requirements. Our solution provider partners across this industry, particularly I'd like to mention the TM Forum Enterprise Cloud Leadership Council, ECLC. That's a group, TM Forum is a group of maybe 800 companies that come together to work on solutioneering and delivery through the TM Forum frameworks concept. I've been a member of TM Forum ECLC for a couple of years, and it's great to see the partnership now coming between TM Forum and the Open Data Center Alliance. So as the solution providers come together to deliver solutions that meet our usage models, the ODCA then looks at that. Our members take those models. We work through proofs of concept. We then work through into industry adoption. So we consume, and we vote obviously with our wallet in terms of the ability of those services to provide benefits. And then finally, ODCA shares the results of that work. So we bring together, we act as a clearinghouse for some of those results. And from that, obviously, it takes the cycle around again, and we understand the next set of opportunities and challenges. So here's an eye chart of a few of the biggest challenges that we see in the industry. And we ask our organizations, what is your biggest challenge? And clearly, the first thing you'd expect to come up, and it does come up, is security. Big challenge. We want to be safe with what we're doing out there. So the second thing is application migration. How do we get applications moved flexibly into that cloud, across between multiple clouds, and potentially back out of that cloud afterwards? So the interoperability issues in that space. Data on the right here, quite interesting as well. If you could have 20% more money on your cloud budget, what would you do with this money? And the interesting thing is, it's all about implementation strategy development. So it's about how do we go from PowerPoint to action? And that's something that we're very biased towards at the moment as well. Trying to think about how do we create crisp enough requirements that allow solution providers to lock onto those requirements and deliver tangible results that are competing for share in that marketplace, yet interoperating in an open way inside that marketplace, and driving forward the practicalities of implementation inside that space. So this is the unique approach, I think, for the Open Data Center Alliance. And this is about a focus on service assurance. And what we mean by service assurance is critical parameters such as elasticity, recoverability, performance, latency, client priority, things that are valuable to us in terms of running our own businesses. We encapsulate those parameters into service assurance parameters. And then we set attributes against those parameters. So we want grades of elasticity, grades of performance, grades of reliability on the service. And those grades allow us to differentiate, for example, a development test solution from a production solution. So these things apply directly through into our four key themes here: the security theme, the transparency theme, management theme, and the regulation theme. Next slide, please. So as I said, security remains our number one concern, and the biggest concern here is intellectual property. we had to be able to protect algorithms and codes and documents and business know-how, regardless whether it's in our data center, regardless if it's on a backup tape sitting in a tape store somewhere, and especially in this case, regardless of whether it's on in a cloud environment. That's our own internal IP. We also want to protect sensitive client data. So obviously, your companies, your entities, your individuals, your pension funds, you trust banks to be able to store that sensitive data. And we take that trust very, very seriously. And we want to make sure in any kind of agreement that we make with a cloud provider, that security is extended fully out to the edge of that data environment, data domain. Third aspect around security here is to be able to protect transactional data across geographic boundaries. Increasingly, what we're seeing from our regulators are issues where data has to stay in a particular jurisdiction. And if data comes into a different jurisdiction, very negative consequences can come from different regulatory concerns, different legal concerns, and the breach of privacy that comes from that for many of our clients. So our requirements are very clear. Cloud providers have to be able to deliver at least equivalent to enterprise IT security. Without that, we can't even make a start here. So that's a critical first requirement. Secondly, we had to be able to agree and deliver standardized security levels across all the products and across the providers in that space. And then the third point here is security comes from the design, so understanding how things have been put together, and security also comes from the execution. So understanding how to assert security, how to monitor for security, how to detect security anomalies, and how that whole thing flows together. So these things, I think, come together very, very clearly. Next slide, please. So the second point here is about transparency. And transparency in this context, what we're trying to talk about is greater choice and liquidity and price transparency across our services. So as we see the marketplace start to evolve, our challenge here, I think, is how do you measure one cloud provider against a second cloud provider against a third cloud provider? And then critically, how do you measure them against an internal IT provider? So we start to rethink of ourselves as internal cloud as a service type providers for our own private IT clouds. Those have to be measured against the same services. Service catalogs are useful in this space. The challenge, though, is everybody has their own service catalog right now. Everyone has their own definitions. Everyone has their own framework behind these things. And that's the challenge, because we want to be able to get this measurability inside the area. So we want to be able to understand those service assurance levels and really bring this down to a tangible level of detail. What does that mean in terms of translating that through to requirements? We want to be able to create consistent definitions that describe a standardized set of services that are relevant to enterprise IT, that encourage the evolution of this dynamic global marketplace. So what does that mean in simple language? We want to start by saying, here's a half a dozen different types of size and shape and configurations of cloud building blocks, things that we want to buy. And we want to see these cloud building blocks being offered in a uniform way by multiple different cloud providers. That provides the base comparability and liquidity for the space. On top of that, we then encourage our cloud providers to differentiate, extend services, add more options, create more volume, go into different locations, deal with different regulations, attack different business sectors. All of those things are part of this evolving dynamic global marketplace. It's clear that on both sides, we need to be successful as enterprises. We need to make profitable decisions with our selections. It's clear also that this space is evolving and it's big enough for everybody to be successful making profits inside this space. And the way to make that happen, open interoperability in this dynamic marketplace. So we want to be very, very explicit with the terms and conditions of the contractual language. Again, one of the challenges inside this space is you get to a point of selecting a cloud provider, and at that point, you then have to do 3 months or 4 months or 6 months worth of negotiation between two legal teams, putting together an inch-thick piece of paper. Now that, I think, is probably value-destroying for a lot of organizations. And what we want to do is to figure out what's the common 85 or 90% of that paperwork And if we can get that piece done so that everybody understands it's a consistent playing field at that level, the 10 or 15% that's left is something that's much easier to negotiate, and we can get to value much faster from this. So those contractual terms, what we mean by service availability, what we mean by elasticity, what kinds of commits that we want to see from cloud providers, and what things we need to do to be able to provide a stable and a consistent management platform between the two organizations, these things become critical. Next slide, please. So on the management side, strong integration and partnership. Like I say, this is about how do we plug two organizations together. What we need to be able to do is to think about the diversity of these cloud solutions and all the management challenges in them. And you saw earlier from Lockheed Martin how they're starting to put together management dashboards across that space. It's critical. Our IT operations staff need to be able to monitor health and safety of the systems 24/7 every single day. We need to be able to do that regardless of whether it's internal or external. So there's no such thing as the accountability moving outside of an organization. We source a solution, we own accountability still for that solution. So what does that mean in terms of requirements? I think of this thing, when you see at trade shows like these, you see cloud providers or enterprise IT providers wheel up a container outside, container data center. What does that thing need, first of all? The first set of things you see happening, they plug in the umbilicals, they plug in the power, they plug in the network, they plug in the water supplies, they plug in the communications. In a very physical sense, those are the things that we're doing here as well. We want to be able to hook up the umbilicals that manage incidents, problems, change management, the ITIL management pipe in between these solutions, so that we can talk the same language. When we want to control change, we would have some things that change on our side, some things that change on the vendor side. When we want to propagate a new image through to the environment, we need to have a standardized method to do those things. So there's a whole sequence of things on the operations side as that relationship comes together that we want to link together in this picture. We also want to integrate the service selection and orchestration and billing sides. So this is all about how you connect the environments together. Next slide, please. So on the regulation side, global multi-business sector, global commerce, and global compliance is a hugely complex area. There are so many regulators, there are so many regulations, and the number of laws in this space are tremendous. Data privacy laws. We need to be safe out there. Every single business sector and every geography has a unique set of regulations and laws. And understanding that space and being able to interact with that space, that's a real challenge. And part of what we bring to the table from the ODCA side is the expertise from all of our member companies about the kinds of regulations that we're concerned about, so that we can make sure that this partnership works very closely between the two sides. So it says here, ignorance is no defense. You have to be able to do this. So what does this mean? So service providers have to be able to meet regulatory obligations specific to our various business sectors. So we have to have this partnership working between the two sides. We also need to be able to audit that. We need to be able to have right of audit as well for auditors into these spaces, which is one of the good reasons why we need to be able to control location and proximity for these things. So we have to be able to assess and assert on our side as well as the enterprise customer that we're still meeting our regulatory obligations. So again, we need to have a very clear dialogue between the two sides to make this possible. Next slide, please. Okay, so I want to now come on and talk about Deutsche Bank's cloud story. And we've been in this field for probably 4 years as cloud, probably 6 years as grid computing, and probably 8 to 10 years as various flavors of flexible, adaptive computing. Next slide, please. So we really started thinking about redefining IT as a service inside our organization way back in 2002. And we started to evolve from an IT support organization just putting a few servers out and putting a few operating systems together. We started to evolve what we called then, and we still call now, shared hosting services. Simple containers, and starting to package these things with different criteria, SLA criteria, recovery criteria, etc. around these things. 2008, we created our first generation cloud internally. We had something called 3CV. We had a partnership at the time with 3PAR, HP C-Class Blades, and VMware Virtualization. We put those three together, and we built cloud in a half a rack type solution with self-service portals, very fast delivery, thin provisioning attached to it, blade technology driving it, everything virtualized. Actually, 2008 to 2012, the language has changed slightly, but the concepts are still very much the same. Next slide, please. 2010, 2011, 2012, we've been on a journey, part of it rebranding, so creating an internal Deutsche Bank cloud, thinking about how that transitions from just the shared services into assuming the cloud attributes and driving this thing forwards, and then looking to see what the opportunities are externally. So we had a concept of something we call 4Gs internally, and our 4G concept was creating a global set of foundation services, a global computing service, a global file service, a global database service, and a global web and application hosting service. And these four services put together start to create building blocks for the IaaS level inside our environment. So then we started to think about what are the attributes? If we want to claim that this thing is cloud, what are the critical attributes of cloud? How do we express those? How do we measure ourselves in a very quantitative way? And then how do we compare that between internal cloud and external cloud? And gradually, as we start to clarify speed of delivery, pooling of assets, elasticity, automation, virtualization, etc., we started to build the value propositions and the marketing campaigns internally. We started to get increasing adoption of these services. So then we started looking outside and looking at the exploration of opportunities inside this space. I should say, by the way, that the pictures, you quite often see people talking about cloud, presenting these little fluffy cumulus cloud things at the start. I prefer the clouds on the other side. I prefer the big storm clouds, and I prefer the hurricane clouds. To me, the energy of the cloud is really the potential of what we can bring from cloud computing. And the water content, the amount of water that these things can dump, that's like the compute capability that these things can dump. So these little fluffy clouds, they're fine, but give me some of these big ones, please, because that's the kind of thing we want. We want to really bring a lot of capability to this space. So as we start exploring opportunities inside this space, we started looking at all the public clouds. Literally, we've talked to pretty much everybody in the space. We started to look at community cloud capabilities inside that space. We started working with our partners in TM Forum, ECLC, and we started working with our partners here in the Open Data Center Alliance. We started working with cloud management startups and small .coms inside this space. We also created our own cloud research environment. We have a joint venture between academia, local government, industry, and finance in Frankfurt. It's called frankfurt-cloud.com. And we use that as our research prototype, playing with some new ideas, figuring out what works. So we actually are a cloud provider on the one side and a cloud consumer on the other side. Next slide, please. So our key concepts, tick through these, please. So first concept here, we want a complete solution. It's not just the technology, it's an operating model. The operating model includes the lifecycle management. What do I mean by that? How do you create it? How do you select it? How do you provision it? How do you monitor it? How do you patch it? How do you upgrade it? How do you retire it again at the end or transition that into the next service? We need to think about the service being the lifecycle service rather than the individual. Next, please. We think the virtualization is critical to this solution. Yes, you can do cloud without virtualization. Personally, I think that the virtualization layer is critical as one of the abstraction pieces inside this picture. It allows us to drive up utilization of the assets. It allows us to do flexible placement on the assets. And for technology compliance, by which I mean moving the virtual machines to one side to replace the technology underneath and then laying it back out again, that technology roadmap compliance is much easier when you have a layer in between. On the automation side, this is about acceleration of repeatable things. We want to be able to do this at big scale. And to do that, trying to do it with humans and shell scripts, with the best one in the world, you can't do it. Not at the thousands and 10,000 scale. We want to be able to do this repeatable processing at that industrialized scale. Policy is the next attribute. And policy and automation, these things go very closely together. What we're trying to get to is straight-through processing, no touch, no human touch required for standard requests. So what that means is, in our environment, if you're complying with the policies, if you're selecting the mainstream products, if you're doing things in the simplest and most logical way, we want to get out of your way. We want you just to be able to go straight through. In fact, quite often people think it's just about self-service for people, to be able to self-select something, little GUI, click, point, click, select a service. We think it extends even further. We think it extends to the application itself. So the application self-selects the amount of resource that it needs. Application sentience or application intelligence. Might sound crazy, but what I'm trying to express here is elastic applications need to grow and shrink depending on what the business demand is on a second-to-second basis. You do that by having the application talking directly through to an orchestrator through a policy engine that allows the application to grow and shrink inside that space. So that's the ultimate application level consumerization. And then finally, a tiered service model. I think choice of service and choice of service vendor are critical inside this environment. You need to be able to provide the different price points. You need to be able to very clearly talk about what am I getting and what am I missing when I select a particular price point inside this environment. So these are key concepts for us. Next slide, please. So our longer-term vision is we're starting from private cloud. And as you heard from Andy in the previous session, private cloud, the challenge with us going to a public cloud is regulation and compliance and all the other good things that I've spoken about here. So, next please. So what we're trying to do here is bring together both the internal cloud, next please, both the internal cloud and the external cloud. Internal cloud, highly optimized internal cloud services for the thousands of applications that we run inside a big global investment bank. The external cloud, enterprise grade, please. I want it to be equivalent technology capability to the internal cloud. I want it to be regulatory approved, and it has to be an external cloud that gives me choice and selection and all the positive aspects of an external cloud. And then what we're trying to do is to federate these two things, to create this environment where policy automation and information flow goes between the two in a highly secure way. Next, please. It's raining, which is a good thing. So that's the cloud compute delivery of value to us. So on the internal side, internal private cloud evolution. And what do I mean by that? So some of the things in this space, development test is obviously the first and easiest place to start inside this space. The next one is grid computing. Grids for us are our large-scale calculation farms, risk engines, ability to be able to calculate prices and options, etc. That's a space that very easily scales inside the cloud. The third area here, multi-tier applications. So web front end, Java middle tier, database back end, a bus and some monitoring agents. That kind of SOA pattern very easily instantiates into a cloud environment. And let me take that picture a bit further and then extend onto the other lane here. Future hybrid cloud extension. And what we're trying to get to here is how do we extend the value proposition of this internal private cloud, which we're in the middle of doing this right now. And this is absolutely an evolution towards where we're getting to. Taking this out into an external hybrid cloud environment as well. So this gives us pay-per-use opportunities, variabilization of costs. It gives us speed of delivery. If we want to have 10,000 cores within 20 minutes, there's a way that we can do that externally in a way that's much more price transparent and much more simple to create than doing it internally. Then we have the dynamic cloud bursting application capability. So this is the classical, I need 10,000 cores, I need them right now. The place I'm going to go is external for that stuff. The third is the evolution of the future data centers. So this is about how internal and external data centers come together. And you start to see the hybrid models of you host yourself into a data center that also has cloud in the same data center, so you can get the great mix of internal proprietary and external. Next, please. So here's a cloud stack. On this cloud stack, I've got various different concepts. A hosting service for compute, a grid hosting service, a database hosting service, a web hosting service, a Java hosting service. These are all x86. And then I have a Solaris and an AIX hosting service on the side here. So you have a whole variety of vendors inside this space. So click the button. So we have inside this picture, you press the next piece, complexity. These lines represent all the combinations and the complexity that comes through this model. What we want to do here is to abstract this picture. Next, please. Abstract this picture. So that complexity starts to get hidden behind an abstraction layer. That layer gives us a single pane of glass. It gives us compute, network, storage, and identity, and all the attributes underneath. Next, please. Then you have the platform as a service layer. This abstracts the platform layer away as well. So the grid becomes a grid platform as a service. Database becomes platform as a service. And then above that picture, you have applications. So line of business applications plug into this space. Next, please. So take an example application here, a risk, profit, and loss application. It needs to sit on top of a grid. So at some point, it talks to a grid platform as a service, and then it talks to infrastructure as a service underneath that. The application is decoupled from the platform is decoupled from the platform underneath. This is the ODCA's capability and maturity model. What we have inside this picture is an evolution from simple SaaS, Salesforce type model, compute, storage, and network, traditional IT model, simple compute hosting services building up in the side, enterprise legacy applications, our main estate of applications out there, across towards the vision of the federated and open cloud. And this is part of our reference architecture for cloud services. So say on the arrow here, we're about halfway through this picture. So we've evolved from the simple compute, we're starting to do more of the complex compute inside our environment, the more elastic capabilities on our private cloud. We're starting to evolve a new dimension of cloud-aware applications, but we're still waiting to move towards that evolution into platform as a service and right through to the end. So where are we headed with this story? I'm wrapping up now. So, Saad you saw earlier, we think as members of the ODCA, we have an influence on up to $50 billion worth of increasing acceleration spend of cloud services. We're doing that by evolving the entire size of this marketplace, whilst simultaneously bringing down $25 billion of cost for our own annual IT organizations across this group. Tremendous impact from this. Next, please. What we're trying to do inside this space, bring together cloud service providers, rich, elastic, flexible, global solutions at scale. Bring that together with, on the enterprise side, growing numbers of consumers of cloud, not only buying from cloud, potentially selling excess capacity as well. Take the Amazon model, apply that to enterprises as well. And then the final piece coming in, technology solution providers, providing the technology services, the cloud brokerage services, and all the manageability inside that space. The evolution in the middle of this picture, this emerging dynamic cloud marketplace that we're all talking about. Next, please. So that's the end of my session. Just wanted to point out here the 4 panels that we have coming up from here. The cloud security panel comes up very shortly, a few minutes from now. Cloud transparency after that, after lunch. Then we have cloud management, 150. And then we finish the day with cloud regulation inside this stream. And then we bring it all back together again for a wrap-up. One more slide, please. So the resources, we want to encourage you to come and look at the Open Data Center Alliance's website. We want you to learn about what we're doing. The requirements are all up on our website. They're all free and open for you to download and review. We'd like you to look at our new ODCA Pete tool. We'd like you to share with us, collaborate with us. Tell us what you like, tell us what you don't like. This is about a conversation between these groups. And then tonight, please join us at the forecast reception. With that, I'll take a few questions if you'd like, or I think we have 5 minutes or so. So if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. There's a microphone at the front here. Can you come to the microphone, please?
So in terms of, let's see if this is working. So in terms of the, I guess the relationship or the dialogue between IT and the business units, has that changed at all as you've gone through this evolution?
Specific for Deutsche or for ODCA?
Specific to, in your experience.
It's evolving all the time. I think we we started from a business perspective that cloud means that you don't need enterprise IT, and business can then transact IT services directly onto the internet. Fantastic, I don't need to deal with all this bureaucracy. And then 10 seconds later, oh, can we have single sign-on, please? And we don't know if it's secure, and we don't know how it's being backed up, and we don't know if it's compliant with regulations. Could you just take care of those things? And that's the traditional starting point, I think, for the dialogue in this space. And what we're seeing is, as this marketplace evolves, as the concepts evolve between particularly the platform and the software as a service layers, we're seeing a much more mature discussion across our organization where we've managed to educate our businesses on the importance of security and regulations and integration of these services. And we're starting to have a new dialogue because they see that we now have multiple different ways to deliver business value back to them. Not just the corporate IT, but we're also looking to leverage these external services. So it's just a very interesting time right now, I think.
Okay. Then, I guess as long as I'm up here.
Sure.
To what extent have you explored, well, in terms of your top 10 technology vendors, do you see yourself continuing to work with those vendors in the same proportion, or do you see the potential for a new generation of technology vendors to significantly encroach upon that top 10?
I personally think that we're at a very dynamically unstable point in the evolution of IT trends, where traditional vendors that have made billions of dollars from selling proprietary solutions into corporate data centers and stacks that are created on a very horizontal basis. Here's a storage stack, here's a network stack, here's a server stack, here's an operating system, here's a database. That business model that's worked very well, I think, for 20 plus years now, I think that model very, very much is a threat right now. I think that you're going to see major vendors respond to that. You are seeing it right now in terms of creating more flexible cloud building blocks and modular solutions. The V-block concept, I think, was kudos to Cisco and EMC and VMware for putting that stack together. But that's one of maybe 20 different ways we could do that stack right now. That's interesting. Some of the challenging names that we would not ordinarily be thinking about inside this space, not the major vendors you'd expect to see inside a tier one investment banking type environment like ours, those start to become viable inside this space. Part of the value you get, I think, from putting an abstraction layer and a cloud layer over the top of these services is that you can afford to start implementing and experimenting with different stacks underneath and starting to get a much more dynamic and flexible set of infrastructure underneath. So part of this interoperability story is about major companies, do you have the confidence to be able to create interoperable solutions that allow pure competition and flow in and out between the different platforms? Small vendors, create a stack that looks sensible inside this marketplace and challenges some of those long-held ideas that you have to build a stack out of 20 different vendors, and we're very interested in that right now. So that's what I mean about the dynamic marketplace that we're in at the moment, whether you're taking the service externally, whether you're creating the service internally, or whether you're putting the brokerage and arbitration between those things. This is just a very interesting time, I think, for the industry.
Thank you very much.
Great questions. Thank you. So one more question at the back. Probably we can take, what do you think, Regine? Make this the last question, thanks. Yeah, please, go ahead.
I had a question on security compliance area. Just wondering, what are your requirements or what are your thoughts in terms of implementing security policy based on, say, boundary or region where the resources are in terms of storage or computer network? And the second part of the question is that what governs that, what motivates that? Is it the government regulation or is it your private policy that motivates it?
So I could have asked for a better question. Thank you very much. The very next session we're going to have is the security panel where we can talk exactly about those things. Just to quickly answer the topic though, security is obviously a huge challenge for us all around this whole environment. The security boundary that we're worried about is from the point where the customer touches our services, ours in terms of whether we source them or whether we run them, right the way through to the final disposition of the data at the back of this. So we want to make sure that it's an entire secure environment inside that space, not just on the perimeter, but right the way through from one end to the other. And what drives us? Government regulation, or government laws, government regulations drive us. But more than anything, it's policy. Because what you find is when you're dealing with dozens or even hundreds of regulators in maybe 50 to, I think we're in like 75 countries around the world, all the regulations are different. And what we want to do is to find the super set of regulations that make sense for our industry, and then create a consistency layer across that, so we can at least meet every regulation and increase the bar where appropriate as well. So that's how we do it ourselves. Great question, though, and I think some of my friends on the next panel will like that question as well.
Yeah, I do have a follow-on question for the next session then.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.